the government and others may use the excuse of the Ukraine war, it is not the Ukraine war that has led us to this disaster we are facing, nor is it the chaos in the international energy market, nor is it the energy producers. They have been told for the last 30 years to cut fossil fuel exploration, that there's no future in it. They haven't invested in it, nothing like as heavy as they should have done. No, it's our leaders. In failing to adapt sensible energy policies and joining the green cult, whose every prediction so far has been wrong. All the mainstream political parties still belong to this failing cult, and it is failing. Boris Johnson has truly been over the top on his green energy policy. So much so that I've awarded him my Nuts Award. Totally failing to understand the principles and failing to understand the consequences of his actions in pushing for wind and solar, but in particular wind. The damage has been enormous, and I shall explain in this video. But let's not just pick on Boris Johnson, because his madness extends to all the other political parties, just as bad or even worse. So let's look at Labour and Keir Starmer, who is now pushing for more wind farms and plans to double them, no less. And by the way, as I'll show you, even if you increase wind farms tenfold, there'll be times for long periods when you've got no power at all. Because when there is no wind, you simply end up with lots more turbines not turning. The Liberal Democrats leader, Davey, also is a big green propagator of wind farms and plans to double them, just like Labour. This is going to make the situation even worse and power bills even more costly. In other words, these parties are putting forward policies today that are the cause of our problem already. They actually want us to go even further down this road of madness and make the situation even worse. Because if their policies had worked, we wouldn't be in this crisis today. The Greens' policies are on a totally different planet. Their policies would bring any country to its knees. I will explain some of them. We aim to reduce energy consumption to a third of our current demand, not grow, not have industries growing, not allowing for the population increase, nothing like that. No, we're going to reduce the demand by a massive 30%. We could get there by improving energy performance on new and existing buildings. Yet that could make a contribution, yes, and by rethinking industrial processes to reduce the energy intensity of products. So they're now masters of all the different industries. This is pie-in-the-sky stuff. This is total green madness, but it gets worse. They then go on to say we will aim to reduce total UK energy demand to 900 terawatt hours a year by 2030. That's incredible in the next 7.5 years, by the way. And 600 terawatt hours per year by 2050, reductions of approximately 40 and 60% on 2012 final energy demand. So we're going to go down up to 60% below what we were 10 years ago. That would collapse our society as we know it. But it doesn't stop there. Wind will provide the main source of power by 2030, followed by wave and tidal power. Well, I am a water resource engineer, and I understand wave and tidal power, but I understand most of all wind power. So when the wind doesn't blow, no matter how many wind turbines you have, all you've got is a lot more wind turbines producing nothing. And when the wind blows too much, all you've got is to be able to pay all these wind turbines to shut off, because you can't control how much you get and when you get it. This is a formula for the most expensive electricity you could ever have, and for lots of periods without any electricity. It is truly bonkers. It would be churlish of me to ignore the SNP. They fully deserve 4 Nut Awards. You only have to look at what is happening in Scotland. The SNP's wind farm policy, completely out of control. Scotland is now home to more than half of the UK's onshore wind farms, with thousands of turbines operating as part of a multi-billion-dollar industry. But the facts are, wind farms have been paid to refrain from producing up to half of the electricity they're capable of generating, according to research that led MPs to warn that inappropriate decisions on wind power were forcing excess costs onto consumers. An analysis found that in 2020, 3 large wind farms in Scotland were paid a total of 24.5 million to fail to produce about half of their potential output. When you look at the problems with all these wind farms, how many trees do you think have been cut down so far for Scottish wind farms? And the answer is 5 million. As this cutting points out, the Scottish Conservatives highlighted the fact that about 5 million trees, almost one for every person in Scotland, has been cut down to clear space for turbines in the past 6 years alone. So, around about 800,000 trees a year are being cut down to make space for wind farms. Really green, this policy, isn't it? But as if just to ensure that the cost of living is going to spiral way up and poor people are really going to suffer, the SNP also makes sure that when the wind doesn't blow, there's no gas to take its place. All these mainstream political leaders ask you to sacrifice for a lie. So let's look now what that lie achieved, what that sacrifice achieved. Well, what you were told all the time was the plan was to reduce CO2 in the world, to reduce CO2 in the atmosphere, to stop runaway global warming. Of course, this hasn't happened, even though, look at this graph, every single climate conference, including Glasgow, the latest, has made no difference whatsoever to the rapidly increasing rise of CO2. As regards a country, when we claim we've reduced our emissions by X, all we've done is add that X to China and India and so on. For example, this graph shows how the USA output of CO2 has leveled out and then declined, whilst China has shot up. And even under the Paris Agreement, which many people don't know, China can do anything it wants without restriction until 2030. And the result is that we in the West have suffered and reducing our industries, whilst those in the Far East have gained. The UK now accounts for just 1.8% of world manufacturing. But the side effect of the extra CO2 that we certainly have put in the atmosphere has been a huge growth in record crops throughout the world. Watch my video, More CO2 Please, to explain. And now to briefly explain how stupid wind power really is. You build a modern new home. You plant some trees in the garden, but then decide, no, you're going to put a wind vane up. That's going to be your source of power. So you knock a tree down and construct a wind turbine. And then to be totally green, we slap on solar panels to cover the roof. We are now a totally green house and probably well insulated to boot. Waking at 7 a.m, it's our lucky day. The wind's blowing and we can actually have breakfast. At this time, the solar, of course, is producing nothing. However, at 9 o'clock, the wind stops blowing. So no one can get on with cleaning the house, with dishwashers, doing the clothes, anything like that. That comes to a freeze. But more importantly, so do those who left home to go to work. Their work comes to a stop and they're sent home. And of course, the cost of doing that to the producers, to the manufacturers, is enormous. But rather than just carry on through the day, I think you should get the idea now that you can only use the power when it's available from the wind, and the solar doesn't really produce much until much later, and when it does, it produces an extremely small amount of power. Of course, those in the day problems would be totally insignificant compared to situations like happened in 2018 here, where the wind power stopped for 9 days. There was a high over the UK. It frequently happens. 9 days without any wind power at all. So on these policies of the green, wind and solar, we would have no way of continuing with industry or life as we know it. Not possible, nor is it possible to store that amount of power in any system. Okay, that was a rare event. It would still have to be covered, and it isn't that rare. It happens maybe once every 4 or 5 years, the 9 days. But more importantly, let's just take a typical month, not an unusual month. Let's take last June in the UK and look at the wind pattern. Then, how much power through the month was produced by wind? And you only have to look at this graph, which is the ups and downs of how much wind we were getting. And when it is below that 50%, of course you'll hear claims, we've got 50% of power from our wind, great, let's celebrate. But in actual fact, immediately after that, it drops down to next to nothing. Even throughout a given month, it would just destroy industry. And Lord Frost put it very well. He called wind power a medieval form of power, and using it would return us to a medieval form of life before we had fossil fuels. At this point, it may be a good idea to take as example how the green leaders in the world, how actually they manage their homes. So let's take a look at Al Gore. This man has made millions out of carbon offsets. He's an extremely wealthy man who flies around the world on a private jet. But let's take a look at his seaside premises. Not bothered about sea level rises, of course. What does he power his house by? Well, he has electricity feeds like anyone else. But in addition, just in case that fails, he has a super large, industrial size gas cylinder ready to power in on his home. So he understands that when power fails, when other sources fail, such as wind, you have to replace it with gas. And that is the truth, be it at a home or be it on a national scale. Without gas, wind cannot work, and you have to install as much gas power, as much gas generation as you have wind for when the wind's not blowing. It has to be rapidly acting source like gas. It cannot be nuclear, because nuclear and coal, for that matter, cannot change quickly to follow the demand pattern throughout the day. Now, this is an interesting graph. It tells you what sources we've used for our energy as a proportion for each year in recent years. Now just look at how little has come from the wind. With all the investment made in wind, offshore, inshore, a lot, just look actually how much it's contributed for the enormous cost it's been. And as I've already explained, it has made no difference whatsoever to the amount of CO2 in the world. That is a total fallacy. All we did was export it. Boris Johnson pledged to power all homes in the UK by wind power within the next 7.5 years. Absolutely incredible. Well, all I can say to that is pigs can fly. Obama, on the other hand, at least told the truth about the plan.
Under my plan of a cap and trade system, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket. Even, regardless of what I say about whether coal is good or bad, because I'm capping greenhouse gases, coal-powered plants, natural gas, you name whatever the plants were, whatever the industry was, they would have to retrofit their operations. That will cost money. They will pass that money on to consumers.
As you can see here, coal has declined remarkably. It is very small now. They've managed to almost do away with that. But gas, look at it. This is what they're trying to do away with. They even did away with the storage of gas facilities we had in this country. That is in large part because of a decision taken in 2017 to close Centrica's Rough storage facility in the North Sea, which provided 70% of the UK's gas storage. So we did away overnight pretty well with 70%. No encouragement, no future in gas, but look how much we're actually using. So mainly we get that from Norway, tiny bit from Russia, or used to get, but mainly from Norway. So what's the logic? Instead of producing our own natural gas, we get it from someone else, which actually increases CO2, by the way, because of its transport and so on. Far better to make it locally. And the proof that was typical government stupidity, of course, is that now we're having talks to reopen a sort of gigantic gas storage facility, which is, of course, proof that they made the wrong decision in 2017. And in fact, they've made wrong decisions on green energy policy all the way through. And this has been the fundamental cause of our current crisis. But let's look further at this graph. Nuclear, of course, we haven't been encouraging. We've got one plant being constructed, Hinkley, which should be ready in maybe 3, 4, 5 years. And that's it. But now we're trying to get new nuclear power stations. So again, we've tried to run down nuclear. It's been a bad word, but now suddenly it's become a good word. It's a good thing to do. And of course, Europe, the EU, have made both gas and nuclear now green. They've just renamed them as green sources of energy. Incredible turnarounds as all the rats are scuttling to get off the ship. The biggest emitter of CO2 in Europe is the Drac power station that burns pellets of wood. 37,000 tonnes a day imported from America, where they chop down whole forest, and using big fossil fuel machines, of course, and then go to a plant to make pellets, again fossil fueled, and then go on by train to the coast where they put them on ships that burn fossil fuels all across the ocean to come to the east coast of England, where they're put on trains again, fossil fueled, to get them to Drax Power Station where they burn them and become the biggest emitter of CO2 in Europe. And the cost for this? Well, the cost for this in subsidy from your pockets, taxpayers, is around about £800 million a year to subsidise the power station to do this stupid thing of transporting wood 37,000 tonnes a day across oceans to burn here. It's an incredibly stupid thing that only governments could devise. And last but not least, the bogeyman, oil. All this Stop Oil campaign, our entire economy depends on it. So overall, this diagram shows that what we contributed from what they call renewables, solar and wind, is just pitiful, absolutely pitiful. And the cost has been enormous, but the biggest cost is going to come on you, the public, now, and you're going to feel it in the next year or two, starting this winter. Why are the politicians 100% responsible for the energy crisis? Well, the government and all the supporting mainstream parties are 100% responsible for this crisis because they should have started fracking years ago and built nuclear power stations instead of destroying our own nuclear industry and running down the existing ones. It is that simple. But what of the future? Well, what needs to happen are the following actions. Abandon the net zero program totally and implement an urgent, high-priority fracking program. Leave the Paris Accord. Encourage oil and gas exploration with long-term guarantees. That includes the North Sea remaining reserves. Stop building all wind and solar farms. Quickly build a decent number of small modular reactors, such as the stable salt reactors, where we have enough free fuel to supply the whole grid for 400 years. But is there any hope of any of these things happening? Well, Liz Truss is very likely to be our new Prime Minister within a week of the making of this video. And she has already given some indications. She's dropping the green levy, which is just a small part of the green subsidies, but she's dropping that off the bills of consumers. She says temporary. Let's hope that's just a cover story for permanently abandoning it. Then she's also said she wants to start fracking with the agreement of local residents. A little bit weak, but an indication, and she wants nuclear. So these things are beginning to fall into place, but it does need fundamentally an understanding that CO2 is not the villain that it's been painted to be. In fact, it's a huge benefit to the planet. We are having world record crops because of it. So let's just hope that the government are going to understand that all this work that's been done on green policies has led to nothing. It hasn't changed the incredible steep rise of CO2, and nothing we are doing in this country can do that. That is basically up to the Far East, and we don't control them. And not only that, they're actually benefiting the world, because the more CO2 we have at the moment, the better. It leads to a much healthier planet. Please see my video, More CO2, please. There will be a direct link at the end of this video. And by the way, I am not a member of any political party, nor do I ever intend to join one. Whilst there is no doubt whatsoever that the Ukraine war has increased the price of gas internationally, had we done the right things in the past and had the right policies, that would not have hurt us very much, because we'd have had our own gas and we'd have had our own nuclear. The sad fact is that none of the other mainstream parties that I've outlined are anywhere near even this policy. Basically, our politicians have got to reverse everything they've been thinking on green policies. They simply have to understand that science is actually not behind them. The way this entire green movement has been going, with censorship of debate, means it's not science. Because without that scrutiny, without that skepticism, and without that examination, that is not following the scientific process. But just for practical reasons that will make no difference at all, I do not understand why any government would want its people to suffer so much. It is too late now to stop a lot of suffering. All we can do, though, is try to get out of the mess that our politicians have put us in.